So I try and mix it up a little bit, and since it's an artist talk, I'm just going to talk a little bit about who I am and how I became interested in jewelry and body adornment, and then we can talk more about the items on display here. My grandmother and great-grandfather started collecting at the earliest part of the 20th century, and they were both physicians. They were oral surgeons, actually, so they're in their own right modifying people's bodies just by more conventional standards. But many of us are familiar with Mesoamerican dental modification that includes teeth filing and inlaying of gemstones in the teeth. So, you know, before there was the bling and grill of your urban youth today, you know, there was definitely a cultural precedent that dates back to pre-classic times. Indirectly, my grandmother's travels were very influential, and, you know, since I was a little boy, I grew up looking at, you know, Kayapo chiefs with 6-inch labrets and tattooed natives all around the world. You know, ultimately I dropped out of my pre-med classes in school and decided to be a body artist because I was already piercing myself at a young age, and, you know, your basic high school kid bored and with a safety pin kind of thing. And so for me, there was, as I got to be a grown-up, I sort of applied my, my medical and anatomical understanding and just sort of was at the right place at the right time. My studies and the work that went into authoring my book, it really came down to the profound realization that we are all intuitively wanting to modify our bodies from the time that we're old enough to know what an earring is. I think there's a certain strength and continuity of awareness that comes from that sort of understanding that we're all connected as human beings. How is it that the Aztec and the Maya and the Maasai and the Surma and the Mentawai Island chiefs, every culture on earth, they're all doing the same thing, but they were separated by time and geography. We're living in the first society on earth in history that does not ritualize adornment, where those sort of rites of passage were not sort of handed down from our parents, but nonetheless people had have the need to sort of discover marking their own bodies. When we look around, you know, there are figurines, every Veracruz figure, every Olmec figurine, there's nobody is without earrings. And ear piercing is like the most cross-culturally prevalent form of human ritual and modification there is. In Hindi culture, just as an example, a baby girl was considered, you know, not a girl, was like a completely asexual identity that was not associated with the female until her ears were pierced. All cultures sort of decorate the children in the style of the grown-ups. And you know, in our society, you know, it's clothing usually, but there are still some people that, you know, you go down into Mexico these days and there's no such thing as a baby girl down there without pierced ears. When you look at these items, try and look at them in not just their cultural context, but what it took to pull this off 1,000 years ago. And most everything in this room is at least 700 to 1,000 years old. This was a really difficult thing to pull off as far as melting gold, and techniques like sand casting and edge welding were used to put these together. And this is, you know, remarkable by conventional standards. Every great culture, they were into their septums, the middle of the nose, the nasal septum, ears, and the labret were the sort of three primary forms and locations for a piercing. Different cultures had their sort of favored materials. The Maya were really into stone. Colombian cultures were really into gold. The Aztec obsidian, they were big stone carvers. Those stone ornaments there, the earplugs and the labrettes were handmade. And there are two techniques that were used. One was called string cutting, which is basically creating like a diamond-tipped flexible saw blade by today's standards, but they would use hemp and sedge, and they would bake animal fat on there, dry it in the sun, and it was a flexible cutting surface. So these were cut out of obsidian completely by hand, and I assure you, people can't pull it off today. It's fantastic when you think about the construction, and that those survived 1,000 years is also really amazing. This Mixtec piece over here, in this case, is also a labrette. It's basically invisible, but there's another technique using fire-hardened sticks where they were basically burned, sharpened to a point in a fire, and used to hollow out the centers of these items. There's a gold septum ornament here from Colombia, from the Sinu culture, and this is high carat gold. It's hand hammered. It's very flexible. For people that don't know, 1 ounce of gold can be manipulated, not just theoretically, but literally into a wire a mile long. The molecular structure of the metal lends itself to bringing things to extreme proportion. If you think about what it took to make that single earplug, I mean, that was completely hand hammered from a single lump of gold, you guys. I mean, I've made wedding rings. That takes time. That is really fantastic, and no fabrication lines. It's obvious how they made it. The bigger the piercing, the more gold you could fit into it, and as a result, the more complex a design you could incorporate. The universal ideals of beauty are universal, and now we have science on our side, and we can do some pretty radical things, but a nose job is really no different than skull binding. And the Maya, they bound their skulls and had the elongated skull, and practiced another technique called Daltonism that had to do with making themselves cross-eyed deliberately. Of course, filed pointed teeth and tattoos and big earrings. It was quite the picture of nobility, and it was really the role of nobility to sort of embody the best of a culture.